Hi there. In our earlier tutorial, we saw how can we do CRUD operation with Fish API in our React application, and we use the JSON server npm package to handle our CRUD operation. In this tutorial, we will see how can we send data to our backend. The data can be a string or a file. So when we do that, actually we have two ways to send our data to backend. We can use our HTML form, or we can use JavaScript AJAX method. So when we use React or any JavaScript library, then always it is better to use the AJAX JavaScript AJAX method, because when we use AJAX method, we have the below features that which does not provide with the HTML form. Like we can validate our form, we can show the download progress bar, which I already covered in our earlier tutorial, and when we submit our form to backend, our page do not reload, and when we use AJAX, we only download the required data. That is this why our application is lot more faster than the HTML form. So let's see how can we send data in various way. So before we do, let's see a spoiler alert. In this tutorial we are using the React application as our front end. So to handle the backend, I have two ways. Either we can use Express or Next.js, or we can use any backend language as you prefer, but it is very common with React that we use Express or Next.js. In this tutorial, I will use Next.js. And when we use Next.js, it is very common to use the TypeScript. So if you are not familiar with Next.js, then just ignore the backend part. Just in this tutorial, the focus of this tutorial is how can we send data to backend and receive that data. That data can be file, string or text. So how we handle in backend, that is not the tutorial that is not the purpose in this tutorial, but we will show the method so that who has little bit knowledge of Next.js can understand that. And if you are not a TypeScript user, then just ignore the type part. For example, I have a variable and it is a JavaScript statement, and another one, the below one, is the TypeScript statement. And we can see that the colon number, this is the type annotation or type notation for the TypeScript. Just ignore this kind of type if you are a regular JavaScript user. So let's see how can we create our next application. We can see below we have 3 methods to create our Next.js application. All methods are same. Just use the npm or npm or yarn or pnpm package. Then the command is the same. I will use pnpm for this project. So let's see how can I create a project. So for that, I am in my desktop. So if I go to my C, I can see in my desktop. So my command is pnpm create next app. Actually, create next app. My app name is Next.js 13. It takes some time to download the project. It will ask, do you use TypeScript? Yes. Would you like ESLint? Yes. Tailwind CSS? Yes. No source directory. App router? Yes. And alias do not need to customize. So it will download our project in a minute. It depends in our download speed. So let's see how can we handle our data in various way. while our project is downloading. When we use HTML form, we have two methods. Either we can use the URL encoded method or the multipart form data. So what is the difference between these two format? When we try to send our data as a string, then we use the URL encoded string, because this method encode our data. That means if I put any space or any special character, it will convert that space or special data into a valid URL form. But when we use multipart form data, that means in this way we do not convert our data into anything. Actually, we will send our data as a binary file. So we will see how can we manage our binary file. Actually, the binary file in JavaScript is called blob. Blob means big, large binary object. And when we use the AJAX method, we have many ways to handle the form, to send or receive the data to our backend. The common are three. These three are very common. One is the URL encoded, that is we already see in this section, and another one is the multipart form data, similar this one, but another one we can use the JSON data. And when we try to send our image or any file to backend, we can send that file also in two ways. We can either send our data, our image as a binary file like form data, or we can send our image in base 64-bit encoded string. This way, when we use base 64-bit encoded string, we can send data as a application JSON format. And when we need to try to send our data as a binary or blob, then we must use the multipart form data. Let's see everything one by one. Our application is already created. So let's open our application in our code editor. Now I am running pnpm dev. I can see my application started. If I control click this line, let's move this file tab into new window and move this tab to here and always on top. And we can see this is the base default syntax. Let's see, in our application we have this page file for our home page. So let's remove everything and React functional component, home page. Let's create a form. For that I need to input actually one input, and we need a login form. So I need a username and password. So for that, type will be the email and value will be value. Let's create a value. So constant fields. Actually, how can we create a form dynamically? We already covered that topic in our earlier tutorial. So in this tutorial we only focus the sending data in our backend. Actual email, password. So this value will be fields dot email and change handler. Actually, let's see the CSS. Actually, this pass the field name. String type and the event will be the change event HTML input element. Actually not HTML in input element. So we have the input field. So for that, set fields, it will be the fields and the name will be event.target.value. Let's create another input field and actually remove this line. Create a label. It will be the username, label, email. Oh, mistyping. Label, email address, and another one for the password. Now we need a submit button. Login. Let's add the submit handler. For that, create a form and on submit handler, let's create the function submit handler. It have event, it will be the form event. Now our page is ready, but this is the Next.js 13. So when we use any event or anything, then or any hook, we must convert this page to client component. So we have to use the use client. This directive indicate that this page will be as a client component instead of a server component. Actually, React has two type of component in React 18. So let's save this file. Actually, I can see there is some error. Use state. What is the pop? Change event. Actually, change this one. React change event and React and remove this all. If I save my file, React server component error. Actually, I mistype client, CLIENT client. now I can see my application is running. Okay, now I have to remove the style. So for that, in layout I have the global style. Remove this global style, no need style, this style, and the class name. If I save my file, I can see actually it is still there. Global style. Let's refresh the page. Now if I open my console, I can see there is an error. It says that in browser has a lot of plugin installed in my browser. That is the error message showing. So let's remove this error. For that, I have to use the suppress hydration warning is equal to true. So it will ignore my warning. So if I refresh my page, I can see all the warning gone. And if I submit and click this button, I can see my form output. So if I type username, password, I can see my username and password. So this, now we will try to how can we send our data or handle our data in our backend API. For React 13, I can use new file API, and inside that use the users and route.ts. Get function next response.json status success and data as a empty. Now I have to return this statement, that means return, and I have to export this function. So if I save my file, if I go to this path, it is the API users. So if I go to localhost 3000 API/users, what is the problem? Actually the method name will be capital, so this one. Let's save the file and request again. I can see my API working fine. So to send our file, we need a post request. So let's create another function, and this time it will be post. And when we have post, we have request object. That means request will be request. Now how we send our data from our backend, front end to backend, we already saw how can we do that in our earlier tutorial. We use the fetch API. So let's create the fetch API. Actually, before we create the fetch API, let's see, we already discussed that we can send data in two ways. Let's see how can we do that with the HTML form method. So if I go to my API route, let's see, put a dummy data like it is post request, and another one it is get request. Now if I go to my HTML file, instead of a React JavaScript syntax, let's comment out this line, and we have, when we use HTML form, we have action. Action will be the route that we created, API users. So it will be /API/users. And second thing, we need method. So let's see, method is equal to get. if I save my file, if I click this, try to log in this button, because this form is now a regular form, regular HTML form, so it will refresh or reload our page. We can see our request is success. If I go to my network, I can see my get request is success, and request do not send anything, but our response get. And if we go to my header, we can see that we have two. One is the response header, another is the request header. So when we use the HTML form, we send our data as a get method. That means our content type. Actually, let's see the content type. Content type. Not this one. Content type. It is the response. Request content type. Accept language. Actually, this content type must be the XML encoded URL. That means this content type, but it does not show. I do not know the reason. Let's try again. If I try to this method as post, if I save my file, if I log in, I can see my post request is success. And if I go to my request header again, now this time I can see the content type is the encoded URL, application x-www-form-urlencoded URL. That means when it is the default format when we use the HTML form. But when we need to send binary data, then we must declare the enc type. Enc means the encryption type. Will be the multipart form data. This way. If I save my file, clear the now this time it will be sent as a multipart form data. Let's see my post request. I can request header content type. This I can see the content type is multipart form data. That means this time our data is sent as a binary data. So now instead of this the form method, we will use our AJAX method. That means we use our submit handler. Actually, remove this line. Now for that I will use the fetch API. Fetch, and I have to pass the route name, that is the API/users, and it will be method will be the post and the data. How we have 3y or we have many y, but 3y is very common. These three methods are very common, so we will use the let's see the application JSON format at first. Our data is already in a JSON format. So if I console this line, let's comment out this code. If I save my file, go to my console. If I try to log in, I can see my data is already in JSON format. So let's send our data. For that I have to body method, body option, and pass the data. But when we pass the data, we must convert this object to string. json.stringify, then our data is the fields, and we do not need to pass the header type. Let's see, it will be the headers content type, type will be the application application JSON. Actually, now we do not need to pass this data because by default Fish API use the application JSON format to send data. So let's comment out this line, and when we send our data with the Fish API, it is the promise, so I have to wait this promise. So for that, response await and async this function, and our response return also promise. So response.json convert this JSON, because our backend, in our backend we will always send our data as a JSON in this way. So our data is JSON, so we parse the data or the backend or the response data as a JSON. So it is also promise. So wait and result console.result. Let's see what we get. If I save my file, let's comment out this log. I can see my data comes as expected. We can see this data. Let's pass the same data in post request. Let's ignore this part for now. In post request, we get our data in our post request. In Next.js 13 it is a little bit weird, but in Express our data is the request.body, but in Express it is in Next.js 13 it have to handle this way. Response request.json, because I send my data as a JSON format, so I have to handle this as a JSON. So it is a promise. So await, it will be my body. This is the await, so it will be the async function. Now my body available. Let's return our body here. If I save my file, refresh the page, I can see my data appears nicely, that username and password. Now we can see how can we send data as a JSON format. Let's see, we have another two method. One is the URL encoded and another is the multipart form data. Let's check out the URL encoded first. For URL encoded, I have to convert our data, convert our field value, which is the JSON format. We have to convert this JSON format into a string, URL string. For that I have to use params is equal to new search params, and inside this search params I have to pass the fields. Now this will return the string. So let's see the console log. Console log params.toString. Let's ignore our response for now. Comment out. If I can see my data is converted into a string, that the name and the value, again and ampersand, the name and the value. And we already talked that when we send data as a encoded format. Let's see the request. Actually, we do not send the request yet, but when we send our request, we will see that this request will always be the URL encoded format. That means uncomment my code again, and this time instead of body will be the params of params. And when we use the body as a params with the URL such param, then our content type automatically will be set like this way. It will be the application slash w slash actually x/www slash form URL encoded, this way. Let's see, we do not need to pass this form header because in set URL form already do that, and this time we expect, that means our backend data will be response will be JSON format, so we do not need to change this part. But in our backend this time we send data as a URL encoded. Let's check out first this. It will be form data body. Let's ignore this line because we always try to send a response as a JSON. Let's see what we get if I go to the network part. If I submit my form, I can see my post method is submitted, that succeed. Let's see this post method request header. We can see that application type is the encoded URL. So, and our response is the same, and I console log the response that will be in our backend. That means in backend shows that our data appears in the URL encoded format. So let's convert this URL encoded format to JSON format. So for that, instead of object empty object, I have to convert this body to entries, and then we can use object dot from entries, which will convert our entry to object. So if I refresh my page, save my file, again console log, now I can see this is my front end console log. This is this console log, so no need this one, and this is the output. So this is the output. If I see, I can see that it returns exactly same data that we sent from our front end. Now we discuss we see how can we handle our form data with the URL encoded. Let's see how can we send our data in our form data format. For that, it will be the same. Actually, let's remove all the comment because it seems little bit complicated. So I have to create a form data. So constant form data is equal to new form data constructor. So I have to pass the form data here. Again, when we use the form data, we do not need to pass the header. That means headers this time that header will be the multipart form data this way, but we do not need this line, this header. actually when we use the form data and if we try to use this method or form method, it throw errors. So other method does not throw error, but this form method throw errors. So just ignore this part and everything will be the same. Now we have create our form constructor. Now we have to append or put our field data into this form data. So how can we do that? We can this way form data dot append, then the name is the email and the value will be fields dot email this way. Now instead of hard coding, let's create a loop. So our field is an object, so we have to convert this object into array. So object dot entries, it will be the fields, and this time it is an array, so I can use loop. For that we can use for each, and we know that in entry return two property, so I have to use array method, array syntax, and first one is the key and second one is the value. And now put this form data inside my loop, and the key will be the key and the value will be the value. This way it is very simple. Now we have all the data. So if let's see console log instead of fetch, ignore the fetch, console log the data clg form data, and also we have to convert to string. Actually we cannot do that this way, we have to use the get method. So let's directly see in our backend. So our data is appended in our form, and in our backend actually it handles the same data this way. So this backend code work the same way as it work from the my encoded URL. So let's save this file, and if I go to my network tab, let's submit my form. I can see my request is succeed because status code is 200, and if I go to this method I can see my header. In header is the multipart form data, and if I go to my request I can see my data is a binary data. So and the response is the response, that means the exact value that we pass from the front end we response back from the backend. So now this way, this time we pass the text data. Let's see how can we send the binary data. If I go to my again in a request text, we can see our text is the regular text, password, email, and this one is binary, but this one is can pass password and value. Let's convert. Let's see how can we send binary data. For that, comment out this line. Let's put hard-coded data. For that, form data dot append, and inside it will be the image or avatar. Actually, let's pass the same data, json, or name is the avatar, but we pass the blob data. That means it will be blob constant blob is equal to new blob, and inside I have to pass our data. Let's see, pass our same object, that is the fields. Fields, but when we use the blob we must pass the data into string, so I have to convert this blob again into JSON stringify and pass the data. Now I can see when we create a blob means binary data. That means our data, our username and password will be converted into binary data. That is the raw data. And that we have another method called type, and we can see or pass our data as a JSON application because we know our data is the JSON. So pass the type, it will be application/JSON. Now we attach the data in my form. It will be avatar. Now let's go to the backend, and this time in our backend let's comment out for now this line, and we have our avatar only single property. So let's handle this single property. Avatar, though it is a binary JSON data, so avatar will be the, let's rename this body to form data. It will make sense. Data dot get method, and the name, we front-end we use the name as avatar, so I have to same name in our backend. So avatar, let's console log the avatar. Remember, this avatar is the blob data. That means it is a file, a binary file. So if I save my file, console log, I can see it returns only the success method, but in our backend I can see it returns a file. That means blob is a file. Actually, file is a child component of blob. That is the reason file shows the file. So we have the file in backend, and how we can handle this file. That means when we have a file, we must want to save this file into our hard disk, or actually we have three ways to handle our image or file. We can save our image into a database, or we can actually, let's write these three things here. We can save into database directly, and second one, we can save into our hard disk or file system, and we can save our file or image or anything in our FTP client or file transfer protocol, FTP server. So when our application is very small, in our application has a small number of images, then we can save our data image into our database, because it will be lot more easier to handle our images. But database is a little bit expensive, so that is the reason when we use our file system to save our file. But when we have lot of file, then we do not use our regular server or hosting platform to store our file. We use separate FTP server to handle our files. So we have a file in our backend. So let's see how can we save our file in the file system. That means the second option. So when we have our file in our backend, we cannot directly save our file into or manipulate our file, because when in backend we always have in Node.js, actually for Node.js, we convert our file into buffer to handle our file, because in Node.js, if we can somehow anything convert to buffer, then we can do all kind of operation on that buffer. So we have to convert this file into buffer. So let's see how can we do that. Actually it is a 3-step process. It is as a buffer or blob form data avatar as blob. Okay, I type mistyping. Okay, this is already a blob because we can see that this is a file. That means it is a blob, or we can create our blob. This is the step 1. Step 1, convert to blob, which is already is, and second we have to create array buffer. So let's create buffer from the avatar, which is a buffer, and it has the array buffer method, array buffer, and this is a promise, so I have to wait, and this is the second method, second step. It will be but blob to array buffer, and third step is we have to finally get the buffer from the array buffer. So I have to buff or bf from the, let's remove the line, it will be the buffer dot from, it will be the array buffer, ARR array buffer. This is the third step. Get buffer from array buffer. Now if I console log my buffer, let's ignore this line. Now if I save my file, refresh the page, go to, I can see my buffer appears. Now we know that our buffer is a string, but that means we pass the string text in our buffer. So when our buffer is a string, so I can convert this buffer into string. So let's constant string is equal to buffer to string. It is the UTF-8 string method because it is the common for regular file. So if I this time console log the state, if I submit my form, I can see that our data appears in our string format, that is the JSON format. But we know that this string is a JSON string, so we can convert our string into JSON again. So let's convert JSON dot parse step. This time it will be JSON data. If I save my file, I can see my data, it is the valid JSON data. That means we pass our JSON data, convert the data into string, and then we make our JSON string as a file or blob or a binary data or raw data, and then we this 3-step convert blob to array and array buffer to buffer, and once we have the buffer, we can do all kind of operation in our backend. So let's see how can we save this JSON data in our file. In our public folder, we have 2 files. Let's see how can we save our JSON data. So for that, I have to create, let's comment out this line, no need JSON, we only need the string. So I have to save this file. For this, Node.js has a module called fs, import fs from fs/promises. Now it fs dot write file. This write file need two things at least. One is the name, that is the file name. File name will be string, and the second one is the data, that we already have the string here, so it will be the JSON string. So it will be the string. Now this fs promise return a promise, so I have to wait. Now I have to give a valid URL for this project directory, else our application will not save. So let's see how can we access our public directory. For that, I import another module, path module from path, and this time I will create, it will be path.join method, and inside the join method I have to process.cwd method, and I have to give the folder name, it is the public folder, and I have to give the file name. Let's see the demo.json. The process.cmd, it returns the project directory in our file. I cannot save anywhere because I already in our Linux file system, so there must be file permission. So we always have to save our project directory, and then the folder name must have already which already have to create. For our case it is already created, and the file name. So if I save my file, let's see, we have two files in our project. If I try to this login, I can see my demo JSON is saved in our JSON file. So we can see that how can we send blob data or binary data to our backend. So this time we send the string. So let's see how can we send the file, real file. So for that, let's create a file. Input tag, login, and create a file. Though it is not required here, it need to create the sign up page, but let's see for testing purpose. File, and file do not need the value, and change handler will be, let's create separate change handler, file change handler, and no need to pass anything. Let's create this function. Actually, let's before submit handler, file change handler, event, again react dot change event, and it will be the input element. So I have to save my file into a file. For that, I can, let's create another state. I can do in the same field, but it is a TypeScript project, so I have to lot of typing issue, so I do not go to this section or this part. So instead, let's create a separate when we use avatar our file, let's see in action. For that, change handler, let's here set avatar. It will be the event. Actually, let's get the file here. File will be event.target.value, actually files, and here will be the first one, the first one. So I have to pass the file, my file, but as soon as I do that, it shows the TypeScript error. That means here the avatar value either can be it is a string or it will be blob. String or blob. Set avatar. Let's convert this file or blob. Just ignore the TypeScript error. So our file has the file. So if I save my everything set, type and the name, let's see, avatar. If I save my file, I can see my avatar appears. Now when I click this, let's see my image, and before submit, let's go to the submit handler, and this time again we send the file, but this time it will be the name file will be the not this blob. Let's comment out this line, and it will pass the real file. That means our file, avatar file, which is in my avatar state value. So it will be the avatar. If let's before in submit, let's see in what we get. Console log. Let's here console log avatar, or actually let's submit console log here, because this time it is not an text, it must be image. So let's console log the buffer. If I save my file, choose login, click this button, I can see my buffer appears. That means my image appears in my backend. So this time it is not a text, it is an image. So let's console log the form avatar. If I save my file, again console log, I can see this time it type is the image.png. That means it is a PNG file, and the name is the amateur.png. So, and this is the size, file size. Let's save this file into our file system. So for that, I have to create the same function. That means this same method, but this time it is not will be string, it will be the buffer. Now the file type and file name, it is the image file, but when we do the functional, I am trying to hard coding file type, but when we try to handle multiple images, then we do not do the hard coding style. We get the type from this type and then create a random name, then we put the name. But for this tutorial sake, I use the hard coded value. The file will be avatar.name. That means this name will be the same. So if I save my file, I have only two file and on the JSON format. But this time, if I log in this page, submit this button, I can see my image saved in my backend. So I can see my image in my backend. So we understand how can we send data in our backend in multiple way. We discuss the JSON format, encoded format, and the form data. When we use image, we can either use the form data to handle our image, or we can use the JSON format. So let's see how can we upload image without binary data. So let's see that in action. For that, instead of passing our data as a binary form, let's pass our data as a JSON string. So how can we do that? For that, I have to go to my change handler. That means this is the file. I will convert this file into a string. So how can we do that? We have a file reader. So new file file reader, and it will be reader, and this file reader has property reader dot read read as we already saw how can we handle array buffer, but this time we will use the data URL. That means the base 64-bit URL encoding. So I have to use this format. So I have to pass the file. That means the my file. Again it shows the same error, so I have to convert as file. And when we have file, we have a event handler. That means reader dot on load and reader dot ready state. When our ready state is equal to 2, so if ready state is equal to 2, means that our image is fully loaded, then we have to set avatar as the reader dot result. Again it is as string. So let's comment or remove this line. Now my data is as a string. Let's before we submit, let's see the data. No need the form anymore. Comment out this line, actually remove this everything, and we will pass as a JSON format. So it will be JSON dot stringify, the same old method. So this I have to pass the avatar as the avatar. That means the state value, but this time my state value is the string, base 64-bit URL string. So let's see, before we submit, let's console log here. Avatar. If I save my file, I can clear the console. Actually it shows the file. Refresh the page, load the image again, and if I save my file, I can see my file this time is a base 64-bit URL string, and this part indicate our file name. That means let's copy this part because we need this part. So I have our file as a string, base 64-bit string. So let's send our file to our backend. Now this time our file is the JSON format. That means JSON. We do not need to mention because by default it is a JSON. So if I go to my route, this time it is not a form data anymore. It is a JSON. So let's console log. Actually this is not a form data. Body and comment out this line. If I save my file, I can see my log as a buffer string. That means the base 64-bit string, the same data as we pass from our front end. So when we have the base 64-bit encoded string, we can easily convert this string into file, but we at first have to remove this text from our file. Copy this line. Let's go to at first I have to get the body, that means the avatar. So body dot avatar is a string, that means the base 64-bit string. So base 64, it is a base 64 string. So I have to remove the file part, or the what is this called, metadata part. So I have to remove the base 64-bit dot split or slide split by base, let's colon base 64 comma. We remove this part and we need only the second part. So it will be the data URL. Let's constant, let's see our data URL. This time it will be remove this line portion. So if I save my file, remove, if I console log, I can see this time it is only the string. It is a lot. So it is the string, that means it has no more the metadata anymore. So I can now convert this base 64-bit string to, actually it is not, it will be the data URL and it will be the base 64-bit. Now we have to convert this base 64-bit string to buffer. So how can we do that? Constant buffer is equal to, it will be the buffer object dot form, and I have to use the base 64-bit and I have to convert this to base 64-bit this time, this method. That means again I have to put constant. Let's see what we get. Now we get the buffer. Now we can save our buffer into file same way this line. So this time it will be the buffer, file name will be the, let's see the file name, avatar2, and again we paste the hard-coded value because we saw that it is a PNG file, so I have to use the PNG format. So if I save my file, let's remove this avatar, no confusion again, remove this line. Now if I comment out this log, lot of messages, Now if I save my file, I can see my image stored in my backend. So this time we use image, upload image as a JSON string or a base 64-bit string, or it is also known as a data URL. So we can see how can we pass data file as a blob data, that means the binary data, or we can convert our file into base 64-bit string and then we submit as a string, So hopefully it was a little bit long and complex tutorial, because I see that lot of people makes these all things in complex way or mixture, which create lot of mess. Hopefully it will explain all the details in our, let's see in our next tutorial.